A year ago in April, war erupted in Sudan. Fighting between the Sudanese Armed Forces and Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, quickly engulfed its capital Khartoum and evolved into a nationwide war. Thousands of lives have been lost since the conflict began. Millions, many of them women and children, have been displaced. The country's infrastructure and its economy have been laid to waste. Death through starvation now looms. But to what end? This week on the program, we'll look at the state of the humanitarian crisis ravaging Sudan and why mediation efforts have so far yielded no outcome. I'm Penina Karibe. Welcome to Talk Africa. The humanitarian impact of the conflict has truly been devastating. Around 15,000 people are estimated to have lost their lives and another 8 million have been displaced. We're now joined by Laura Lucastro, Chad country representative for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, to tell us more about the effect of the conflict on the people in the region. Thank you for joining us, Laura, and welcome to Talk Africa. Let's begin with the state of the conflict. Paint a picture for us of how bad the situation is today.
I can tell you that with respect to 1 year ago, there are things that have improved, but unfortunately, there are many aspects that are still very, very worrisome. First and foremost is the fact that in Darfur, the conflict is ongoing. And we are very, very worried because it's extending to North Darfur that for the moment has been spared. So now we have conflict between different groups in around El Fashir. El Fashir is quite far away from Chadian border, but still refugees started to arrive. There will be, or there are already information about, air attacks and a lot of human rights violations and villages that have been burned down. And people that have started to be displaced within Sudan, but also on the way to Chad. So the number one priority for all of us working in Chad and those of humanitarian working in Sudan, the priority number one is still the end of the conflict and the stop of all the hostilities, because that's the only way that we are going to see some hope at the end of the tunnel. In the meantime, on the Chadian side, we have arrived now, we have counted the 572,000 refugees that have crossed the border. The 570,000 refugees, they add up to the 409,000 refugees that were there before, as you know. So we are getting close to 1 million Sudanese refugees in Chad. These 1 million refugees, are in an area where there are not more than 2.5, 2.6 million Chadians. So it's more than 1/3 of the entire population in these areas that is made of refugees.
Laura, how many camps are there now and what are the conditions like in those camps?
So, before the beginning of the crisis, we had a total of 14 camps that were hosting the so-called all caseload, so the 400,000 refugees that arrived in the course of 20 past years. So then now, since the arrival of the new refugees last year, we have basically created extensions, 10 extensions to existing camps. And we have had to create 5 new, we prefer to call them settlements and camps, because they look like really already now like very, very large kind of villages. So we have had to build 5 very large ones with an average population of 40 to 45,000 refugees per settlement. So very, very large population surrounded by host villages that in comparison have a very small population. And the problem is that we still have 160,000 refugees at the border that are waiting to be relocated. So funding allowing, we are prepared to start opening at least another 3 refugee settlements. So we will have more than 20 refugee settlements hosting refugees in this part of Chad that is very challenged because already resources from all points of view are very scarce.
What has been the psychological impact of this conflict on the refugees?
You know, we say now that 20% at least of the refugees that have crossed the border into Chad, that they would require specialized mental health services and psychosocial support, at least 20%. At least the 20% is one of five people that do not manage to have a normal life because of the trauma they endured. You know, I have seen them, I've heard, you know, personally the most horrible witnesses, the children and the adults telling us, for instance, the women that they were forced to witness the killing of their husbands, of their fathers, of their brothers, because they were the most targeted. And the same was for the children. And I've never seen an emergency where a child doesn't laugh and then doesn't, you know, play around. Normally, in these settings, you see always the hope comes from children that despite all difficulties, they are still engaging and playing. But in this crisis, that was not necessarily the case.
What do you see as the worst case scenario if the conflict in Sudan continues?
You know, the worst case scenario would be that indeed the conflict continues, more displacement. In addition, what we are witnessing today is that the people are not only leaving Darfur because of insecurity and human rights violations, but also because of lack of food, lack of access to any kind of services. So the worst case scenario is having hundreds more thousand people crossing the border. Our planning figure for 2024, that was part of our RRRP, so Regional Response Plan, foreseen already, you know, 250,000 people additionally to the ones that had arrived already in 2023, crossing the border in 2024. In the first 3 months of 2024, we have received already the 78,000 new refugees. So we are in the middle, if you want, already at the beginning of the worst case scenario. We have a situation of presque famine in Darfur, more conflict ongoing, people seeking safety, seeking food and services. So if this situation continues, and on the Chadian side, we do not have a sufficient humanitarian response, and if the development intervention that we have been pushing for to accelerate their implementation do not also come to fruition, and basically, I mean, the total destabilization of this part of Chad and possibly of Chad altogether, which of course will be a disaster. Because as you know, Chad is the only country holding on in that in the Sahel, has a very strategic role and importance. We are in the middle of a democratic process of turning towards the election of the new president. So everything could be put in jeopardy. The conflict in Sudan could cross the border into Chad. There would be more conflict and more criminality. Again, a lot of conflict with host populations. So again, the continuation of the conflict in Darfur, plus not sufficient humanitarian assistance and not accelerated enough development interventions could just bring, the entire region where we have the refugees to collapse and then to total destabilization from a socioeconomic and from a security point of view, without, of course, as I mentioned at the beginning, to count the endless number of people that eventually will lose their life because of lack of access to medical care and food and water, and the minimum social protection.
Thank you for your time and insights, Laura. We're going to take a short break now, and we'll be back with our panel of experts who will delve deeper into why this conflict has been so challenging to resolve. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Joining me now are from Washington, D.C., Kamlas Omogo, Director for Conflict Early Warning and Early Response at the Intergovernmental Authority for Development, IGAD. From Cairo, we have Dr. Ezzat Saad El Sayed, an Egyptian diplomat and Director for the Egyptian Council of Foreign Affairs. And with me here in studio, we have Mr. Faisal El-Bagir, Human Rights Defender and Fellow, the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism. Welcome to you all, gentlemen. I'll begin with you, Mr. El-Bagir. It is now 1 year since this conflict in your country, Sudan, began. How bad is the situation inside Sudan right now?
The situation is unbelievable. We used to say the Sudan conflict, we name it as a forgotten conflict. But to be honest, now we found a new name for it. That is a neglected conflict, a neglected war. So the situation now, it's really terrible. People are suffering, are dying. Every day people are dying. Millions of people are dying. Millions of people are forced to flee the country. Millions of people that are forced to flee their places. And up to yesterday, news which we receive from home, still the two warring parties are continuing this war.
When you speak of the two warring factions, is there a side that is gaining ground? And also, is there a likelihood or a sign of an end to this conflict?
This is an ongoing war. This is a proxy war. No one of the two perpetrators can say, I am winning against the other. They will keep on this kind of playing these games of they go front, they come back. Both the two warring parties are fighting together, they are continuing, they're destroying the country, they're destroying the economy, they're destroying the life of the people, they're destroying everything. People are really suffering. People of Sudan, they're suffering. Millions of Sudanese, they were forced to flee the country to the neighboring countries. Millions of Sudanese, they are displaced now. Each and every person in Sudan are affected now by this war. The only victory which we can have when the war is stopped and when the two perpetrators are taken to accountability, that will be the victory. Otherwise, it's a proxy war, and they will continue fighting each other. And we're afraid that it will not remain in Sudan. After they destroy the country totally, this war, if the whole world is not aware of how they have to stop it, the war will go into the neighboring countries and to the region.
Ms. Omogo, let me come to you. Why has IGAD been unable to put an end to this conflict?
It's not a question that IGAD has not been able to put an end to this war. As you probably are aware, there are a lot of initiatives that IGAD has engaged in towards working with the Sudanese towards a negotiated political outcome of this conflict. From the word go, I think IGAD was the first organization that actually convened the highest level of leadership, the summit on Sudan. And it has done so, I think 4 summits have been convened towards this. And IGAD has also engaged in numerous shuttle diplomacy and back channel engagements with the different actors, both within Sudan, in the region, and then beyond the region, including AU. And so we've really put all our attention into the Sudan conflict, but we all believe that when everything is said and done, it is the people of Sudan that actually will determine where they want to go. The rest of us, we can only work with them, and as IGAD, we are determined, and we have shown that we are willing to work with the Sudanese towards that end.
All right, so Dr. Saad, let's talk a little bit more about mediation efforts. They have failed so far, including the Jeddah peace process that was pushed by Saudi Arabia and the US. Why did they fail?
You see, I think it is necessary that I begin by saying that we are dealing with a country that is diversified culturally, religiously, ethnically, and also, unfortunately, the the political elites in that country failed from the independence since 1956, almost more than 70 decades ago, to establish, a real state with state institutions that are able to impose law and order. But the problem of the failure of almost all initiatives to solve this conflict, this bloody conflict, has to do with the mistrust among the conflicting parties. The third reason also has to do with the fact that many regional and international players are involved. So all the, beside of course the nature of the Sudanese society itself, which is based on tribal factor, all this contribute in a way or another to the standstill we found ourselves in till now.
Okay, so Mr. Omogo, let me come back to you, because Mr. El-Bagir earlier said that if this conflict in Sudan is not contained, it could likely spill over to the region. How prepared is IGAD for a protracted conflict in Sudan, especially as global focus shifts to other crises in Gaza and Ukraine?
Like I said earlier, IGAD is fully aware of the ramification of this conflict. Already, we are seeing the impact to the region, not just in terms of the refugee outflow, but we're also seeing a country as South Sudan already feeling the economic impact of the conflict as a result of the dependence on the oil resources. Because then the resources that cannot be received by the South Sudan is likely going to affect its ability to conclude its peace agreement and also the elections. But also I wanted to say that I don't entirely agree that the international attention has shifted to other conflicts. Of course, I know that those conflicts. I want to see it more as the world is facing so many concerns, demanding situations, and I think the international attention is invited. In that Sudan, just like any other conflict, is within the radar. And I say this because as IGAD, we have engaged with many key partners representing the international community. Actually, most of these partners, for example, have special envoys. These special envoys have been engaging with the AU, they've been engaging with IGAD, they've been engaging with the parties to the conflict. And even just last week, France, Germany, and EU convened the Paris conference, which did some pledging. So for me, I think it is not so much that the attention has refocused somewhere, but it's just that the attention is divided as a result of so many conflicts. But international community, as we are aware, are doing all the also to stay focused on the Sudan conflict.
Right. And so what are your final thoughts, just to follow up on that, Dr. Saad? How then can these two warring factions be brought together? Is that even possible at this point in time?
This is the dilemma, and this is what I said in the beginning. The problem has to do with this diversification of the Sudanese society, and this is not a curse, by the way. It is a blessing. It is a blessing that the country has diversified cultural and religious, ethnical origins and so on, and normally and by nature the Sudanese people are so peaceful And so there is no reason for those two conflicting factions or parties to continue that way. Because I'm sure if we can invest a little bit more in the internal players in that country, it would be a great thing to do. And I can tell you, as someone working in a civil society organization, we started to, have some kind of civil society initiative. We invited many of the political leaders here in Cairo, religious leaders, former diplomats and former officials, to try to get them together at the Egyptian Council for Foreign Affairs. We are in the middle of doing that, and I would tell you that so far we managed to have some common ground on many controversial issues among those forces.
Okay, so Mr. Omogo, let me come to you. What are your final thoughts? How then do we get these solutions that you're saying that only the people of Sudan can provide? How do we get them to get these solutions?
I think for me, what really is important, the first things first, is that a condition should be established for the people of Sudan to be able to have this conversation. And that should start by a permanent ceasefire. I think this is something that has been eluding the negotiation efforts. And until that is reached, the environment will not be conducive enough for this conversation that it should be all Sudanese included, all inclusive, and led by the Sudanese. So we need really to have that ceasefire negotiated and agreed on. And most important also is that, and I think this is something that IGAD and other mediators are trying to push for, is to have the two main protagonists, the two generals, really sit together. And it seems like there are positive signs that this could be the direction that things could be going soon, that they are likely to be having that face-to-face meeting. And we really hope that that face-to-face meeting can take place. Because it's only when they sit together and they look at the problem from one side, then they'll be able to find solutions, they'll be able to agree on the ceasefire, and the environment will be conducive, will be established for the Sudanese really in their different shades to be able to sit and negotiate for their the future that they desire for themselves. So I think this is very important prerequisite for this kind of way forward to be found. Of course, there are longer-term measures, as we have said, that Sudan, if you look at it, most of us have not been there, but from the pictures we are seeing, from the reports we are getting, the country is going to need a lot of support in reconstructing the infrastructure and the services that have really been destroyed by the conflict. And the sooner this is stopped, at least you could have something to hang on as you rebuild the country.
Okay, and so Mr. El-Bagir, and you've had the privilege actually to be able to hear our guests, Dr. Saad and Mr. Omogo, and listening to them, especially in these final moments, them proposing solutions they think would work to find lasting peace in Sudan. As a Sudanese yourself, first as a journalist, as a Sudanese who understands the two generals, the dynamics in your country, do you think the solutions they're proposing would work to bring Sudan to a lasting peace?
From the beginning, I have said this is a proxy war. A proxy war means that the two warring parties are not representing themselves, are not representing even their own interest. They are representing foreign interest. That is number one. Number two, the Sudanese people, with the history of Sudan, they are able, if they're left alone, to continue to fight, but not the two perpetrators, not Al-Burhan, not Hemeti. Both of them, they don't have the political will to go to peace, they want to continue the war.
So then what can work?
What can work is to put a huge pressure from the international community, from the African Union, from IGAD, from all the living peace people, to put pressure on these two human rights perpetrators to stop the war. Firstly, to stop the war and to let the humanitarian assistance to pass. Now, the humanitarian assistance is being taken, whether it is in Burhan area or Hemeti area, it will be taken by them and used politically from their sides. This should not be allowed. The international community, they have worked. We have seen conflicts in many other African countries and in many parts of the world. If there is a political will from the international community, they can reach to a solution. And the solution is to not to forget these issues of impunity, these issues of accountability. This is the message which I want to say. And we know that no war can continue for hundreds of years. At the end of the day, the war must stop. And the war must stop with negotiations. The most important thing that no one of these two perpetrators will win this war. It will continue. So this issue of accountability, the issues of impunity should be put on the table, and they should be forced to stop the war and to allow the humanitarian assistance to move, to allow the people to move. The country is being destroyed totally, from Khartoum to Darfur and now each and every day there is new areas which are being targeted by the two warring parties. So this must be stopped once and for good, to have justice on the agenda. Whether it is international justice, because it's very important to have international justice, and we have seen it in many other conflicts in the world. Where there is international justice, they stop the war, they stop the conflict. So now we need the international community now to have real political will to stop this war today before tomorrow. Because each and every day where we stay, the situation will be more worse.
Okay. Thank you very much for that, and thank you so much for all of your insights. But that's all we have time for on this edition of Talk Africa. A very big thank you to all our guests. Laura Locastro, Chad Country Representative for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. Kamlas Omogo, Director for Conflict Early Warning and Early Response at the Intergovernmental Authority for Development, IGAD. Dr. Ezzat Saad Al Sayed, Egyptian diplomat and Director for the Egyptian Council of Foreign Affairs. And Mr. Faisal El-Bagir, Human Rights Defender and Fellow of Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism. Remember, you can be a part of this conversation online through our social media handles on Facebook and X. You can also catch the show on our YouTube playlist. To keep the conversation going, and join us again next week for more Talk Africa from me, Penina Karibe, and the team here in Nairobi. Until next time, it's goodbye.